Another day, another woman who broke her microphone right before this. Another day, another woman with chapped lips and dry hands. Welcome to the winter solstice. So today I'm continuing my series where I'm giving you recommendations based on book length. We've started with the ittiest of the bittiest, and we're going to the chonkiest of the chonkers. Today we're looking at the largest size of what I consider small books, and that is 200 to 300 pages. So I did just want to give an honorable mention. There were quite a few books and videos I've already discussed, so those will not be on this list. But I also wanted to give Lisa TerKeurst a shout out because she is a Christian author that I have read many books from, dealing with all kinds of difficult topics from forgiveness to rejection, and basically all of her books are this length, but I did not want to include them all. But if you're interested in working through any interpersonal centric pain points with spirituality, I would suggest Lisa TerKeurst. I have 13 books for you today, so this is a very unlucky list, but luckily for you, I have my brand new clover earrings. So it's okay. It's okay. I'm Irish. Irish American. But yeah. So there are 3 books on this list that are all-time favorites. Love that I have a variety of book lengths and my all-time favorites. It just makes me very happy. These lists have all been various sizes, but I like that there tend to be a lot in this smaller chunk of sizes because when I do readathons, more often than not, they're gonna be less than 300 pages among the books that I choose. So let's round out our small books. Today, I have 3 books from one of my all-time favorite authors, so I'm going to start with him. One of them is one of my all-time favorites, and that is none other than J.D. Salinger, who most people only know one book for, and it makes me sad. The all-time favorite book of his that is on this list is Franny and Zooey, and I did reread this for the 3rd or 4th time this year. And every time it has been a joy. I've got more out of it. I have loved the characters even more. So these are 2 novellas. Franny is one and Zooey is the other. And all of his novellas follow the Glass family. So Franny and Zooey are 2 siblings in the Glass family. And we get to know all of the siblings through each of their stories, which I enjoy a lot. And the sibling thread throughout all of them is the oldest brother, Seymour, and the fact that he committed suicide. And that is very prevalent in all of these novellas. So Franny's novella is about Franny taking a break from her undergraduate studies, and she's meeting up again with Lane, her boyfriend, from their long distance college year. They're in very different places than when they saw each other last, so there's a lot of emotional, mental turmoil going on in Franny's story. And then Zooey's story is basically immediately after Franny's story, and we are following Zooey throughout his home with his mom and Franny coming home and figuring out how best to support his sister and meet her where she's at, because all the siblings have kind of gone through their own trials and she's the latest one to be going through trials, so they're grappling with how to support her. So it is very cerebral and philosophical, but it's also just the reason that I love all of his novellas, which is very sibling centric. There's so much sibling heart and love in these stories, which is why they are so near and dear to me. And if you're curious, I tabbed a few things, hence the colors. I always tab favorite quotes. In this case, those were the light greens. The pinks were all character development. I like all the moments where you specifically see how the characters are who they are, because I love all of them so much. And then the light purple, like here, is sibling sweetness, just any moments between siblings that I loved a lot, which happens every single time I read his stories, even Catcher in the Rye. And then the dark blue, or the indigo, is voice, because if there's one thing J.D. Salinger is good at, it is voice. The voices of his characters are so distinctive. Franny's voice is distinctive from Zooey's voice, is distinctive from Holden Caulfield's voice, etc. And he just does it really well, and he always makes me laugh. I love how he is Gen Z before Gen Z existed. And then we have the one that has very polarizing opinions, and that is The Catcher in the Rye. This one, I just stuck to some basic tabs here and just marked my favorite moments. This one, most people don't know, because they don't know any other J.D. Salinger, is still related to the Glass family, but the tie is that none of them are actually in this book, but rather one of them, Buddy Glass, is the author of this book. And so if you look at it as Buddy Glass writing a fictional story, you can see the way he projects his sibling dynamics in this story, and in that way you find out more about Buddy, you find out more about Seymour, and you find out more about their entire family by reading this. So that's just a whole other layer. And for people who don't like Holden Caulfield, I would argue if you try any of the other novellas and come back to this, that is at least a different angle through which you can maybe find more depth in this story. So Holden is a troubled kid who's just way off the beaten track and is very sick and tired of everyone and everything. It is truly just watching a young man be very depressed and in a lot of despair, and you come to find out why. It's very much like someone who is pretending not to care, but they absolutely do, and maybe they're afraid to admit that they absolutely do care, and that is part of why they're feeling so down and so deeply. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions with despair, with depression, with even suicidal ideation, is that you know, it can feel like apathy or numbness at times, but also the reason I would wager that you're experiencing any of those things is because you do feel very, very deeply, and life and how it's going and who you are or aren't doing it with matters very, very deeply to you. So I think The Catcher in the Rye does a really good job of capturing the essence of despair, and my favorite part is that Holden cannot be who he is without his little sister, and she's the star of the show for me. So, and then we have the third and final J.D. Salinger on this list, 2 additional novellas. These ones are Raise High, The Roof Beam Carpenters, which I know is a mouthful, and then Seymour, An Introduction. I love how simple his covers are, because it makes me love what's inside just for what it is, and the cover doesn't taint anything or color anything, and I actually really like that, and I wish that more books did that. It keeps my expectations limitless, basically. And there's really not even really a blurb, though I did just notice there's a quote from Buddy Glass, so look at that, that's cute. Yeah, so this one, I love how colorful this one is as well. So this was actually one that I read first in high school. This was the first of his stories I ever read. And then this one, my dad always said was the densest and the hardest, so I actually never read this one. So I just reread this one for the first time last year or the year before, and then I read Seymour for the first time, and all of these I gave 5 stars. and these are the main sibling novellas altogether. So Raise High the Roof Being Carpenters is mainly about Buddy. It's about Buddy and this very eclectic group of wedding guests leaving Seymour's wedding, and again, it has a lot to do with Buddy, but it also has a lot to do with Seymour indirectly. And this is the one story where Seymour is still alive, which I find poignant. And then Seymour, in introduction, is really a memoir on Seymour from Buddy, and pairing these two together is so bittersweet, and it just gutted me, but I thought it was so beautiful. I don't think it made sense to pair any other two novellas together than these. Like, these had to be paired together. Franny and Zooey had to be paired together. And I would say this is especially underrated, but especially so important if you love brotherhood, if you are a brother, have a brother, even if you don't, if you just love certain people who have been through deep mental illness, and even if you have a loved one who committed suicide, I think this is so beautiful to read. It's not like graphic or triggering, doesn't go in depth on his death at all, other than stating how he died. It's simply just an ode to someone you love so much that you desperately wish was still around, and I think everyone could use this. It's so wholesome, despite knowing that the premise of it is so deeply heartbreaking. I just think there's so much innocence in the way that these characters reflect on their brother as well, and that makes me love all of these stories so much. So again, if you're curious, I will go through the annotations I did. So the light blue, I did faith as a theme, because I think there is a lot of faith between the characters, and they're all very philosophical and spiritual in their own ways, even if it's not all the same religious system. And then the yellows, because yellow is my favorite color, are all of my favorite quotes. Pink are, again, sibling dynamics that I loved throughout. There's so many more in here than the Franny and Zooey collection, and every single moment was so beautiful between siblings. And then there's a grayish white, and that was just anything that made me laugh out loud, because this had the most moments that made me laugh out loud out of any of his works. And then the dark gray, almost black, is specifically between Seymour and Buddy, because their relationship is so marked in all of the works. You can tell they were the closest. You can tell Buddy just had so many hurdles to get through after his brother passed. I would love to reread this. It's probably the most underrated J.D. Salinger, and it's so quiet, but it's quietly beautiful, and I just think it's wonderful, and everyone should read it. So the next one is the one Christian book I wanted to put on here. Again, not just Lisa Turker's, but there were quite a few Christian books that are specifically like 200 to 300 pages. That must just be the like sweet spot. So the one Christian book I did want to bring in, because I thought it would be also an interesting concept for people who are not Christians, is What God Has to Say About Our Bodies. How the Gospel is Good News for Our Physical Selves by Sam Allberry. This one I highlighted a ton in. I don't know, I don't always like to write in books, but I like stickies and I like highlighting personally. But I loved this book. I needed this book when I read it, because I was working through body image and self-love and body dysmorphia at the time, and it was so good, because especially spiritually there can be this narrative that's not actually true, where we think bodies don't matter, or they're innately evil, or, you know, these different types of narratives that are actually not scriptural at all. So, you know, we don't take our earthly bodies with us in eternity. However, we still have bodies. It's just a new body, right? Which means bodies are important. They're not just throwaways. So part 1 is on created bodies, looking at the body and how it's related to God, man looking on the outward appearance, the gender of people, and then also the biological sex of people. So those are 2 separate concepts and chapters that it talks about. And then part 2 gets into broken bodies, and that goes more into shame with bodily related things, sin specifically with bodily sin, and then the broken body of Jesus, that he had to endure pain and suffering in his body. And then the final part is redeemed bodies, which is then talking about the body in Christ, how bodies become a temple of the Holy Spirit because of Jesus, the body in discipleship, and then the body and resurrection, and what will come of our bodies and the new body and everything. I loved how it was very comprehensive in walking you through like who you are, what you can struggle with, and what the future will be like physically and bodily. It was very, very comprehensive and well done, and it was very sensitive. It was very emotive. There was a lot of good scripture throughout woven in, and that is my favorite part. I don't just willy-nilly read Christian books, but when I know that they're very heavily rooted in scripture and making sure it's centered on scripture itself and the full context and what it's fully saying, this was fantastic. I can't think of a better word than that. The next one I do own, but I have currently lent out, is Increased Risk by Shannon Lee Berry. So I shared her first collection in one of my previous recommendations. This is her second collection. I own both of them because I love her so much. She is constantly writing prose and poetry on her Instagram, but this collection is on having an invisible illness. So she has dealt with Crohn's for quite a while now. I think definitely over a decade now, and this book was broken up into different emotions with working through invisible and or chronic illness. It was very heartbreaking, which is good because it is easily misunderstood by a lot of people. I think a lot of people could stand to read this. It's very straightforward poetry. You'll know exactly what she's trying to say, so don't worry if you're not super into poetry, but I think this is just one of those niche topics that we can't talk about enough, and it really helps you better understand if you don't struggle yourself, and also if someone you know does or is starting to struggle with something or questioning if they're struggling with something. This is absolutely worth lending out to others. It's real, you know, it's not in your head, and that could even include things related to your period. I know a lot of people go through that as well, so you are not alone, and I think this collection is very validating of that. The next book is the classic of the list other than Catcher, and that is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. This is like the most classical romance giddiness I feel that I've felt since Pride and Prejudice, but it's way less known than Pride and Prejudice, so just putting that out there for anyone who has not read A Room with a View. I am very literal sometimes in my expectations of something, and so I was like, I don't know, this sounds like it might be boring to me. It's just like, I know it's something with like a room, you know, and so I just was kind of like, I don't know, this feels like something I might just feel kind of about, and I was pleasantly surprised. So this follows Lucy, who is a British woman who is traveling with her cousin to Italy one summer and runs into this guy. Oh, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Very, you know, raucous and a bit more loud and unafraid to break norms. And so it's kind of this coming of age love story of learning who you are despite who people around you might want or expect you to be. And so it does that narrative really well, and it also is this really more tender than I expected unraveling of trust in romance. And it's really not grandiose at all. It's pretty minimal, but it's subtle and quiet in a way that I really enjoy, and that almost makes it more fulfilling than a romance that's super over the top and in your face. So I just found it to be a little more realistic while still the classical romance feel of just feeling like love is this like larger than life thing that can happen to you. It was very springtime-esque. I feel like I haven't read too many things that feel a lot like the springtime, so if you want something that is a little more life-giving than the current climate can be, I would suggest that you pick up A Room with a View, especially if you want to like kick your feet just a little bit. The next one's a classic young adult book, so I'm probably not gonna have to say too much about it, but if you haven't read it, The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky is such a joy, and also tackles some important mental health topics that young adults could stand to read, and teens. I read it as a teen first. This is, of course, the movie cover, but yes, this is about a boy named Charlie, and the book is actually fully letters. It's an epistolary novel, and we're following Charlie throughout high school as he is very socially awkward and trying to fit in and find friends, who he ends up finding friends in Sam and Patrick. And it also deals with some trauma and discovering traumatic wounds along the way as you grow into yourself, learn more about yourself and relationships. You're also maybe learning about some of your upbringing as well. So it balances all of those things really well. It is a good balance between heavier content and then more hopeful content. And yeah, I just think it's a really important coming of age moment. The next one is entirely fun and inspirational, but it's very cute, and that is Good Morning, Good Night, Little Pep Talks for Me and You by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and illustrated by Johnny Sun. And this started, I believe, through his Twitter, and people ended up loving it so much he just turned them all into a full collection. So basically he would post like a good morning tweet at the beginning of the day and then a good night tweet at the end of the day. And now they're just cute little things you could set on your coffee table and have people page through. So for instance, I just flipped to a random page. Good morning, love. Your best impulse, that selfless impulse, let it take the wheel. Let it drive you toward the person you dreamed you'd be. Good night, love. That need to rest, that constructive impulse, let it take the lead. I hope you dream the best, coolest shit. Let's go. And so they're all like themed each day around something. Yeah, but these are purely just like coffee table things that can just give you a little serotonin boost, and I think everyone could use that this time of year. I also really like the gold shimmer. The next one is a killer poetry collection, and that is Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman. Beautiful, beautiful cover, and beautiful woman who is very wise and younger than me. I love her poetry. So Amanda created this wonderful collection that parallels a few historical themes. So it parallels the COVID-19 pandemic, which a lot of people have not done nearly enough reflection on in terms of how it's impacted you. And it parallels that with the influenza epidemic about a century ago. And so there's a lot of good parallels there, and contemplations such as wearing masks and distancing despite a lot of grief and death going on. And then the other parallel that she explores in this collection is the recent, in the last 5 years, Black violence in the United States paired with the African American slave trade and slavery. And so there are just a lot of really necessary, uncomfortable conversations in here, but she handles them with such thoroughness, such intentionality, and a lot of wisdom that is very inspiring and leaves me awestruck. I barely have the words for it, but she has some fantastic poems in here. This was one I've recommended immediately since I read it, of even if you don't like poetry, these are things that we need to be always thinking about. This is the one about masks that I did mark. We stumbled, sick with shame, groping for each other in that heaving black. We were mouthless for months. We could have been grinning. We could have been grimacing. We could have been glass. And so we must ask, who were we beneath our mask? Who are we now that it is trashed? Again, very straightforward poetry. You don't have to, be analyzing for hours to understand what's going on here. It's just really, really important, and I would recommend. The next one is my all-time favorite author, which is Marcus Zusak, who wrote The Book Thief. But the book for this one is his most recent, which is 3 Wild Dogs. It is a memoir about his rescue dogs over the years that he had/has had, and it's, make no mistake, it is, warning for everyone, a dog story. So we all know how that goes. But it was so well done in terms of it was specific enough to empathize, but it was still broad enough to be universal, and still really well crafted as a story. It was shocking at times, it was heartbreaking at times, it was so joy-filled at times, and just very relatable for anyone who's ever loved animals and an animal specifically. So I definitely think it's the best dog-centered book I have ever read, and he's so emotional in his writing, yet clear at the same time. That always twinges my heart just enough. The next one is another all-time favorite, which I mentioned was the previous illustrator, and so this is my one all-time favorite book that is a graphic novel, and it is Everyone's Ailey Bin When You're at Ailey Bin Too. Silly, like, adds bees to the words earth. This is just wholesome. It is something you can read in one sitting. You have this alien who comes to Earth to discover what it means to be a human, except he doesn't meet any humans. He meets things in nature, and he meets animals, and he thinks they're humans. So he's learning about all of these different creatures. It reminds me of like the Giving Tree. And they all have their little bit of distinctive personalities. The beaver likes to say damn a lot. There's a lot of wordplay and just very lighthearted humor going on. And a little insecure hedgehog and the super artistic sea otter. They're all so fun, and it kind of shows that even when humans are not in the story, there's so much to be said about what it means to be human through every part of life, through nature and through animals. And so it's just life lessons written in a very simple, cute, and maybe a little bit heart-wrenching of a way. And then my last all-time favorite on this list is my favorite poet of all time, and that is Rainer Maria Rilke, who's a German poet who's been translated hundreds of times. And his favorite collection of mine is Rilke's Book of Hours, Love Poems to God. You do not have to be a Christian to love this collection. I know Emma loves this collection from BookTube, Emmy, and she is not a Christian, but especially as a Christian, I felt so validated in how God inspires wonder. We can so easily, and he talks about this in one of my favorite poems, we can box him in as thinking like, oh, we finally understand him, but he's so much vaster and unexplainable than even when we think we know pieces of him. And so I like that he's described as a drifting mist in this collection, and all kinds of different terms that remind me how in awe of God I truly am, and that he is historical, but he's also just unfathomable, you know, to a human brain. This gives me that essence, and I cried several times because I just really needed that feeling towards God verbalized, and I didn't realize how much I needed that sense of awe and mystery verbalized until I read this collection. So as Christians, I would say this is a must read, because not enough people talk about just the pure awe of never fully understanding God, and this does it so artistically and creatively. We're on to the last book already. Sorry, it's getting quite a bit darker now, but it's also like mood lighting. Merry Christmas. And here we go. The last one's probably the darkest one, so sorry, I didn't intend this, but and that is Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. At least that's how I say it. This follows Piranesi, who is a scientist in this house that is full of statues. It's full of this mysterious water that like swells, ebbs and flows at different times of the day. So there's generally like 3 floors to this house, and it's kind of symbolic of Earth. So the top floor to this, it's also never ending. There's never ending rooms and windows. So the top floor is a never ending place of the sky. There's clouds, but it's all in a building. It's all inside. So there's a bit of fantasy there. The middle second floor of endless rooms is basically just land, and the bottom floor is where all the water will flood the rooms intermittently, and there's, you know, sea life and everything like that. So at first I was like entranced because I thought it was like purely symbolic, but there were some huge twists and turns that changed how I viewed this story. So it didn't end up being my favorite because of the twists and turns, but it still is one of the most memorable things, certainly that I've read this year, and even within the past couple years, super memorable. I think out of all of these, the atmosphere wins in this one. The setting from the very first page entranced me. It's like all the gold foiling on these books. It is like when a lot of people say like the ornate language within Dorian Gray like entrances them. For me, I've never felt that entranced by settings. I honestly, when I'm writing, I find that to be the most boring part of writing. This was the complete opposite experience for me, and I think that made it very intriguing. I was more interested in the setting in this book more than the characters, more than the plot. I just found it to be so fascinating and interesting, and I've never felt that way about a setting before. Like there's still settings I love, like Harry Potter and Narnia, but it just felt like the setting almost was the main character, and I loved that, and I kind of wish that would have been what it was the whole time, but it wasn't. It ended up being about other things that I can't say, but I just couldn't stop thinking about this setting as soon as I was put in it. Even when I wasn't reading it, it just intrigued me so much. It was the most creative setting I had been in decades. yeah, this is what I want more of out of fantasy, except it didn't even go as fantastical as I had hoped it would. I want to be engrossed by a setting. So if you have any recommendations that will also make me engrossed in a setting, please let me know. It was so cool. So warning though, the plot gets dark. It gets much darker than I expected it to get. But if you love good ambiance, and I can't wait to see if other books on my list give me this feeling because it's so unique for me. So there you have it. That is a wrap up on what I would say are small books. I love reading small books. They tend to get me out of reading slumps. They tend to bring me lots of wonderful poetry, but also help me dig back into any genre again if I haven't in a while, because it's more accessible when it's small. I am excited to read so many more small books in my life, especially as I continue regular readathons. It is fascinating to also just reflect on these groupings of stories because they're all so distinctive, and I don't think about things that I've read in terms of length very often. Also just gives me more zeal to keep reading, to be able to continue to add to these lists and find a lot of enthusiasm for things. So thank you for joining me today as I'm enthusiastic about more stories, and I hope there's something here that interests you. If so, I would love to know what it was, because to me, I'm like, I know these like the back of my hand, but what stuck out to you? And yeah, I hope you have some good plans to read this month, for a break from socializing as needed. I understand the desire in a large social gathering to like go away for a few minutes and maybe crack open a book, but otherwise I hope you guys are doing well, and I wish you all the best in this holiday season. Continue to be gentle with yourself, continue to find hope and validation in stories and art, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, friends.